my name is Haley. I currently live in Florida. I'm from Wisconsin, though, born and raised. We actually just moved down here to Florida a little less than 2 months ago, so that's all pretty new. I work for a pretty small digital marketing agency called The Digital Ring, and they're awesome, and I get to write for a living, which is really exciting. I've always loved writing. So I get to work with some clients there. I work remotely now just from my home office here in Florida, which is wonderful because I get to spend more time every day with my dog, Scout, who is basically my entire life. I'm super obsessed with her. I love her so much. I adopted her in January of 2019, so we're going on a year and a couple of months now together. I always grew up with dogs, but I never took their training very seriously. We had a couple of small dogs growing up. Two Bichons were my family dogs, and they were wonderful. Pretty poorly trained, definitely just family dogs. We had a house with a yard, so they didn't really need to, behave very well. And in hindsight, I've learned a lot from looking back on that experience. So then as I got older, my family adopted a special needs Siberian Husky. Her eyes make almost no tears, so she gets eye drops like 5 to 10 times a day, depending on how she's doing. And that was the first experience that kind of opened my eyes to the fact that, oh, like dogs can be trained and training is really cool. And that's how we can build a relationship. And it was just like this epiphany where all of a sudden I went from dogs and, thinking that they were great and I wanted to say hi to them on the street to actually appreciating them a lot more, a lot beyond that. So then once I graduated college, I missed my family's husky so much. I was super sad that I didn't have a dog, and I finally had a full-time job, was living on my own. So I kind of on a whim adopted Scout. I met her at the shelter and was like, oh my gosh, you're wonderful, and put in an application. Less than a month she was home with me, and that's kind of how we got started.
That's awesome.
That's great. Very interesting.
All right, so during the week, we're going to be talking about making a schedule. Why don't you tell us what you usually do for her?
Yeah, absolutely. Something I started doing after I moved to Florida actually is I just have a weekly checklist. It hangs on the wall right by her leashes and where her food bin is stored. And it just outlines the sessions that I'd like to do throughout the week from a training standpoint. I've always hand fed her kibble. We do hand feeding, existential feeding. So for us, that just means that she only eats her kibble, and her kibble is always earned through training. Sometimes if we're having a busy day, I might just say her marker word. So for us, one of her marker words is yes, and then one of them is good. So if I don't have a lot of time, I might just ask for one rep of one behavior and then say yes and give her the entire meal just right then and there. But most of the time I try to spread it out a little bit more, and we'll do a couple of sessions a day. And that, I think that's the biggest thing that we do, is that we don't really have a set training schedule. She doesn't have a mealtime schedule. Because we do this existential hand feeding, I have the opportunity to just use that food as a reward whenever it's convenient for us. And I've done that from the first day I brought her home. She's eaten out of a bowl maybe twice in the entire time she's been with me. Otherwise, it always comes from me. I think that's been the biggest thing that's helped build our relationship. And then, now with working from home, it's really helpful that I can just grab a little bit of food here and there, do a 2-minute session as I take a break from work, jump back into work, she relaxes again, and I can do the same thing, an hour and a half later. So that way neither of us are getting burned out. So I guess kind of like a wrap up there is that the biggest thing we do is hand feeding. And then when it comes to a schedule, I try to plan out sessions that I want to do. So that's nothing crazy. It's just, like right now we're working on naming her right side heel. So I just try to do like 4 or 5 sessions of that a week just to keep myself honest and stay accountable. And then just trying to work it in throughout the day whenever is possible. I find that if I plan too far ahead and, build it up in my head, it generally doesn't go as well actually. So I try to avoid saying like, after work today, we're going to have this big session and I'm scheduling out this big block of training time. And I actually try to just go a little bit more on like, how are we feeling? Like, oh, I just got off a conference call with a client and you've been in your crate for 4 hours. So let's do a short session and just kind of let it happen organically. That works really well for us. But again, that checklist helps hold me accountable. So there's kind of a mix of accountability, but just sort of doing what feels right.
Can you give us like an example of what is like usually on the list?
So usually I try to do at least one muzzle conditioning session a week. So I'm a huge proponent of muzzle training. I think that they're great tools, even for dogs who don't have any traditional need for one. There are a ton of situations that your dog might find itself needing to wear a muzzle. One of the things that I think about lately is natural disasters. So I live in an apartment building, and if there was ever a tornado or, God forbid, a hurricane or anything that required all of the residents to go to one central space, there'd be a lot of dogs there, and we'd be in close proximity. And that might be a situation where a muzzle would be helpful, even though Scout's never shown any interest in biting anything. So, situations like that, or if she was injured and needed to have a bone set, sometimes vets will require that they're muzzled. Certain travel situations, if I wanted to take her on a ferry or some type of boat, lots of them require it. So it's just something that I've always been passionate about teaching. So she's comfortable in her muzzle. She can wear it for hours at a time, no big deal. It's big enough that she can pant through it, she can eat through it, she can drink through it. So every week we do at least one refresher session just to keep that association up. Because like I said, she doesn't really need it in our daily life, so we don't use it that often. And I want to make sure that once she was comfortable with it, she doesn't become uncomfortable with it, and then all of a sudden we do need it because she gets injured, and now it's a scary thing again. So there's always one muzzle session, and then there's always outside engagement. So that can look like a couple of different things. Engagement is one of the things I prioritize most with Scout, quite simply because if she's focused on me and I'm the center of her world, she's not as worried about everything else that's going on around her. So we focus on that a lot. So sometimes outside engagement is just I take her in the grass outside my apartment building. We do a really quick, fast-paced marker session, and that's it. Sometimes that looks like a trip to the beach where there's other people and other dogs, and I'm rewarding her focus on me. It can look like a lot of things, but really it's just, something outdoors where there's distractions, where I'm rewarding her focus on me. Those are the two things that are on there every single week. And then usually heeling or leash manners is on there. She has a really nice heel right now, but I'm working on naming it, cleaning up the name so that I can actually call her into it from a distance. And then we've been doing a lot of middle lately. So middle's a position that's actually used in the GRC dog sports social responsibility test. J-Jack started the sport, and it's also just really handy. It's where she comes and sits in between my legs. And it's great for a lot of uses. For example, if there's an off-leash dog, I can call her into middle and I can use my body to keep the dog away if I need to and know that she's safe. It's also really respectful. If we're on the sidewalk and someone looks like they might be uncomfortable with dogs, I can step off and call her into middle, and then it's really obvious to them that she's under control. She's not going to bother them. So that's pretty much been the list lately. And then, just anything else that needs maintenance, like I have to file her nails. Like that's just an ongoing thing. Our dog's nails never stop growing. I sure wish they did. So usually like a nail session is on there, or just some handling conditioning where I'll practice just holding her paws, feeding treats for that, just to keep the positive associations up.
That's great. So we want to tell you the behind of what we are doing with Doogling. The idea is to create conscious to people the importance of training your dog, because nowadays it's I was in the Army, I was in the K9 unit. And of course, before that, I also had dogs all my life. And yeah, it was awesome to have a dog in your house and just play with it and, give it food, and that's it. But then you realize the importance of the training for you and for your dog as well, the importance and how happy they are when they are trained and when they can actually control themselves. Because it's in their instinct to, be animal, of course.
Yeah.
So, like I said, to create conscious to people the importance of training. So what would your advice for somebody that wants to start training their dog and it's been 1 year since they didn't train them? What would be the best way to start them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So honestly, the first thing I would say is that we're always training our dogs, even if it doesn't feel like it. It's a little scary to think about sometimes. Even me, after this long with Scout, I still have it in my head that we are training when we're in a training session, and then I have to remind myself that actually every single interaction I have with her is an opportunity to teach her something, for better or for worse. So I think that it can be a little intimidating because it feels like a lot of pressure, but I actually think if we look at that in a positive way, it's the easiest way to get started. Just training is not this big intimidating thing that only dog trainers do. If you own a dog, you've been training that dog from the moment you brought it home. End of story. So, you can always adjust, you can always do more, you can always do less, but you're already training. So don't let that word scare you. You're already there. And then I would say the biggest thing that I've always struggled with, and that I've seen several friends struggle with, is just trying to ask for too much too soon. Especially when you're first starting out, you see someone's amazing dog on Instagram and they post this video and they're healing perfectly, and it's just beautiful and wonderful, and you're like, I want that.
Yeah.
And it can be discouraging, right? Like, even today, I still find myself scrolling through my feed, playing the comparison game. And so I think getting that out of your head is really helpful, and just realizing that anything you do is worthwhile and going to make a difference. And, don't push the progress too fast. So I like to suggest really simple things to start. Like, if you're a little overwhelmed by the idea of training, try just feeding your dog their dinner as a reward for giving you eye contact while sitting in the living room. The next time there's a commercial on a TV show you're watching, just bring out their dinner, feed them for eye contact, boom, that's all you have to do today. Congrats, you've trained. And then just slowly building that up over time. I think that it's intimidating sometimes. So I've had some really, really kind folks ask me about my training checklists that I post, because it looks like there's a lot written on there. And I think it's really important to say that I break that up. We maybe do like 3 to 6 sessions a day, depending on the day, but those sessions are really short. So when I say 6 sessions, and that sounds like a lot, I might be talking about 6 sessions that were 2 minutes long each. So 12 minutes at the end of the day. And I think just realizing that is also helpful to start, because it's intimidating when you think like, oh my gosh, I have to take 2 hours a day and train my dog now. Like, that's totally not the case.
Of course.
Scout is a reactive dog, right? Like, we have one too, so it's okay.
Yep.
Do you have any suggestions for new people with reactive dogs and how to do their schedule, what you need to take into account?
Yeah, well, that's such a good question. There are so many layers there. Yeah, Scout displays reactivity towards other dogs. When I first adopted her, she was timid around other dogs. She was scared of them, but she didn't actually react in a boisterous manner. So she reacted in a small way, in that she tucked her tail between her legs, she put her ears back, she was very scared, but she didn't bark or growl or lunge or do any of those things that we typically associate with, dog reactivity. And then shortly after I adopted her, it was actually 2 weeks after I brought her home, she was attacked and pinned by a dog on the street. We were just passing them on the sidewalk. As we passed, it lunged at her, pinned her. Physically, she was all right. She wasn't bleeding. There wasn't some big puncture or anything like that. But mentally, she has not been the same ever since. It didn't help that it was so new in our relationship. So here I have this dog, and now one of the first things I've taught her is that she's not safe with me. So that was a bit of a blow. So I think that the first thing that I would say is just forgive yourself as an owner, and don't hold on to what you could have done or what you think you should have done, because a lot of dogs end up developing reactivity. Sometimes genetics are playing a role. Sometimes it's because they didn't have enough exposure when they were in their critical socialization period. Sometimes it's because they were attacked. There can be a million things there. Something I did for a long time was hold us back, and I didn't make good progress because I kept thinking about what I should have done differently. If I had just crossed the street, if I had turned the other way, if I had seen this dog and not walked right next to it, things could be so much different right now. And that got in my head for a really long time. But I had to remind myself that on that day, I could have done all of those things, and this still could have happened in one way or another. She wasn't confident around dogs from the beginning. So definitely forgive yourself first and foremost. Don't dwell on what you didn't do or what you think you should have done, because your dog forgives you. They've already forgotten about it. They might like Scout remembers that she's afraid of dogs. She's afraid of them, but she doesn't lay awake at night in bed thinking about this attack the way that I do, if that makes sense. So that's helpful. And then really for us, the game changer has just been engagement. I had to become the most important thing in her world and teach her that she was safe. So we worked on engagement a ton. We started loose leash walking just in my apartment building's hallway with no distractions, and she just got tons of rewards for paying attention to me. And little by little, we took that outside until, nowadays we can see a dog on the other side of the street, and she sees the dog and she just looks right at me, and she gets rewarded, and that's great. So engagement, I think, is huge. Like, to me, that is the foundation of everything that we do. I've also had to let her know that, reacting isn't okay. Like, she doesn't need to do that. So I do tell her no. If she starts to react, I will, give a verbal correction or a soft leash pop and break her fixation. And then as soon as I break her fixation, we're having fun together. I'm engaging with her. So I'm trying to show her, hey, stop paying attention to that other dog. You don't need to care about that. Pay attention to me, and really fun, good things will happen. And over time, that helps her feel more comfortable seeing them. So for us, that's been the biggest game changer. I really just think the hugest hurdle is that mental barrier of having those experiences where your dog reacts, and it's really embarrassing and it's really tough. And I've spent several nights, full disclosure, where I've gotten back from a walk with her where she looked like a total jerk, barking her head off at some poor person and their dog. And I just come home and I cry. And I'm like, this is so hard. I can't even go for a walk. I'm constantly scanning to see if there's other dogs. It feels so stressful. And I've just had to embrace the process, stop being embarrassed, and just trust that I'm doing the best things for her, understand my why. So why I'm doing this, why I think the training that we're doing is going to work, and just kind of lean into that and trust it, which is much easier said than done. I still get sad about it. I still wish that I could take her to a busy brewery and not have to worry about whether or not other owners are going to let their dogs get in her space or not. But I've just had to accept that this is our current situation, and, wishing it away doesn't do anything, but we can work through it.
Definitely. How did you approach the problems that you saw on your dogs in the beginning? Like, did you approach a trainer? Did you check on the internet? Like, how was your reaction to your dog's issue?
Yeah. So right away, when she started displaying that level of reactivity, I looked into professional trainers. I had done some training research before with my family's husky, but, didn't feel equipped to handle something like this, especially living in a downtown urban environment. We lived in downtown Madison, which is the state capital of Wisconsin, and it was busy. I mean, we could not go out for a bathroom break without seeing another dog. So I was like, all right, we need to get this under control. Yeah. So I reached out to a couple of different trainers. I went to a group class with her that was positive reinforcement based. I did some in-person consults with a couple of balance trainers, did another in-person consult and worked with another positive reinforcement only trainer for a while. I'm really big about mixing methods. So I don't really like to play the game of like, one method is always right or one method is always wrong. I just think it limits my ability to learn. So really my first reaction was to reach out to multiple people and see what they could tell me. And then I tried to take the logic and the reasoning that made the most sense and that worked the best with our lifestyle. So I tried to go really broad, get a ton of info, and then kind of look at that information and figure out, all right, I have all of this in front of me. What makes the most sense for us? Our process probably would have been different if we lived in the country with a huge yard and not in an apartment building. And, I just had to acknowledge that with the trainers I worked with. And so then once I felt like I had more of a handle on some of the in-person things, I had some of those trainers show me different things. They, teach me how to use all of the tools that I was using properly, just to make sure. I wanted a real life person showing me how. I'm a little anxious about that kind of thing. So it just helps to have someone there to like promise me that I was doing it right. And then I finally developed the confidence to do a little bit more of that online. So since then, I've had virtual sessions with a lot of trainers. Jay Jack is one of the most influential trainers in my life. I listen to a ton of dog training podcasts, follow lots of people on Instagram. So I kind of tried to start with like getting a little bit of an in-person foundation, building up some confidence, making some progress. And now most of what we do, I'm just learning from people online, having conversations with folks, experimenting here and there. That was really the progression.
Wow, it's really, really interesting to listen to like what you've gone with this dog and like your experience and sharing this with us. I really want to thank you for this interview. It was just perfect for us to like start, creating conscious to people that the importance of training a dog. And today, when people adopt dogs and they're not very knowledge of training their dogs, they return their dogs to the shelters because they say, "Oh, my dog is not like my neighbor's dog, which she's cute and she does this, she does that." And it's painful when you know that every dog can be trained, just need the right, like you said, the right tools and the right direction. So it's awesome, and we really, really appreciate you for doing this interview with us, and thank you so much.
Thank you.